Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Ware, and I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society. And today I would like to present the beginning of a year-long series via Facebook Live here on the Kentucky Ancestors Facebook group/page. It is going to basically be me or guest speakers talking about different genealogy/family history issues and things like that. So the first one we're going to be doing is going to be making use of surname files. I know I try to every Saturday do a surname Saturday here on this page. And I know a lot of people are always interested in the surname files, and they're always asking questions and all that kind of stuff. So I thought this would be a perfect first program to do, first stream to do, just to hopefully answer some questions and kind of give people ideas of what they can expect and, when they're researching a surname file, and maybe hopefully answer questions and that kind of thing. I do want to say, if for some reason you do miss any of this stream, or you come late to the party, or you see this after the fact, it is going to be recorded. It is recording as I speak. It should be. And basically it'll be on this Kentucky Ancestors page, so people can always go back, and I'll have my contact information at the end of the slides, so people can always go back if they need to get my email or my office phone number or anything like that. So anyways, I'm going to go through this and kind of explain surname files, what you kind of can expect from them, and try to answer questions as people make comments. Do forgive me if I don't get to comments right away. I may try to give my presentation and then stop and answer questions as I go, and answer questions at the end. And I'm also going to try to show kind of how you can navigate our website, which is history.ky.gov, and how you can get to like the photocopy request forms and find like our surname file PDF that we do have and things like that, and that'll be at the end. So anyways, without further ado, let's start talking some surname files. So first off is the introduction, kind of some things that I am going to try to go over and talk about, some talking points as you will. So they're going to be, what are surname files, the records and documents you may find, how you can use surname files, important, and then basically important things to remember. So what are surname files exactly? Well, typically they are usually donated materials that have been given to us over the years. They can be different materials, and each folder is its own special, unique item. So, there may be one page of something in one surname file, and there may be like 50 pages in another surname file. So it just kind of, it depends on what's been given to us that relates to a certain family. And usually they are photocopied documents, so it is a good idea to take that with a grain of salt. It's not going to be typically like original documents, obviously, because you want to keep those kept away safely and things like that. And it can be hit or miss based on how much information is included, like I previously mentioned. So you just kind of have to watch out for that. I have looked at some surname files, and it may just be a letter that somebody wrote to us here at KHS back in like the 1960s, looking for their great grandmother's birth record. And sometimes it may be like a whole family biography, and and multiple records and photocopies. So it just kind of depends. So basically, these are the records and documents you may find when you are doing your research and looking through surname files. And these are obviously not the only things that you'll ever find. These are just kind of what I typically see a lot as far as when I'm researching and looking through surname files, and when I'm prepping for the surname Saturdays that I do. So, so basically what kind of records or documents can be found in surname files? Like I previously mentioned, it's usually photocopies, but then there could be letters or other types of correspondences between different individuals. There could be Bible records of some sort. There could be birth records, photocopies of those, or just information that does provide birth information. Because I do want to say that there can be some, difference between the two. You might find marriage information. You might find death information. There's also cemetery records, military records, family histories or biography sketches, deeds or other types of land records. There are probate records as well. You can also find correspondences. I just realized I had that in twice. I apologize. There's also family trees and family sheets that you might also find that could be of use as well. There's also census records. And basically, just jumping into it, one of the first records I'm going to talk about are Bible records. Typically, they could be birth records or have birth information. There could be marriage information, death information, typically. You might hopefully learn important dates that you didn't know before. Like you may find out that your great-grandfather got married to, their wife in this particular, on this particular date. And then you can basically go and compare that with other records, try to find the actual marriage record based off of that information. You may find other names of your ancestors' family members. You may learn who their parents were, who their siblings were, things like that. So that's also very useful. And once again, most of these types of records, and I'll reiterate it towards the end, when you find information in these surname files, it's best to double check with other records to make sure things match up, because a lot of times you may find conflicting information, unfortunately. So it's always good to double check on that. And then I did want to provide some pictures, or tried to provide some pictures just to kind of show you some examples of what you might find in a surname file. So these two pictures are two different Bible records or Bible-related information that somebody may have gotten from a Bible record. The left-hand side is a photocopy from a Bible, and so it's got, all the fancy, the names are written out real fancy and everything, and so it provides the birth information for different members of the Nall family. And then on the right-hand side is more of a transcription of information that was gotten out of a Bible. So that, is very useful as well, especially if the record it's been transcribed from could be hard to read sometimes. So it is nice to double check with a transcription just to see what certain names or certain words or dates were supposed to be. And then once again, then you can double check and see if it matches up with other information that is around. And then, like I said, there are also birth records or, just birth information that you could possibly find in a surname file. They may be photocopies of the birth records themselves. They could just be a document that provides birth information. And then if you do find birth information, remember to compare it with original birth records if you're able to. And, from this, you could learn the names of your ancestors' parents, or, find an actual birth date of your ancestor that you can then double check with to make sure things match up and all that kind of good stuff. And then here's a couple of examples of birth records or information that you may find, such as on the left-hand side are basically photocopies of, I believe they were like almost like index cards that provided birth information from different family members of the Arbuckle family. And so you can basically get, who their father and mother were, and, their residence and other key pieces of information like that. So, even if you find like something like that, it may not look that impressive at first glance, you can at least get key pieces of information that you can then double check on. And then also sometimes you may get out of like publications, there may be information recorded, like such as the Kentucky Ancestors publication. This is a photocopy from that, and it includes Kentuckians by birth, and so then you can get birth information that way as well. Oops. Sorry. There we go. Next, we're going to talk about marriage information. Marriage information could be anything from marriage bonds, marriage registers, marriage certificates themselves. And a lot of times, like in general vital statistic information, I feel like marriage information or marriage records are a little bit easier to find at times because basically birth and death records, as far as Kentucky goes, if it's anything before 1852, they didn't record those particular records. So, because they didn't start recording vital statistic information until 1852, and then it was kind of on or off between 1852 and 1910. However, marriage information, marriage records, there are different ones like bonds and registers and things like that that do predate 1852 in Kentucky. So if I'm ever trying to research and find a marriage record, I feel like I have a little better luck when it comes to a marriage record because at least I feel like I have a more larger window to double check on that. And so, but yeah, basically marriage bonds it's kind of almost like an assurity between usually like the groom and or a male member of the bride's family, such as her father. And it just kind of was to make sure that the actual wedding was going to take place from what I understand. And I actually will be doing a program relating to marriage bonds later this year. So I'll tackle that specifically a little more detail later on this year. And then there's registers, which that's just, the married couple got registered and, it'll list, their names and dates and things like that. But anyways, so other marriage information that you may find when looking at marriage information in surname files, you may learn the ages of your ancestor. You could learn the birthplace of your ancestor because a lot of times I've seen like they'll say like that they're from such and such place, and things like that. You could also find the location of the marriage, which once again then can kind of help you basically pinpoint the location of your ancestor at a specific time in their life. So that can always be very, very useful. And then you can go to that county or the information that relates to that county and then look through records, other records. Then, you may also learn the names of parents or other relatives, especially if they were witnesses or things to that effect. So that can always be and you learn more names and you can further your research, especially if you do get stuck and hit a brick wall. And then here's a example of a marriage record here that you can, you might find something like this in a surname file. And then next we're going to talk about death information. So like birth records, you may find a photocopy of a death record. You may find documentation that provides information, or important death information. And also, like I've previously mentioned pretty much several times here now, remember to compare death information or any information you find with, the original death records if you're able to, or any other kind of original records. You also may learn the date of their death or the names of their relatives. Especially, a lot of times death records, they'll have somebody who, basically signs off on it, and is like basically the witness. And so they're the ones that provide the information, especially if it's like a child of a parent or, or something like that. So, double check for that because you may learn names that you didn't know about, and then that can create a new path, a new avenue for you. And then here's a couple more examples of death records or information that you may find. On the left-hand side is a return of a death, and it provides the name of the deceased and their age, their occupation, date of death, very key pieces of information that you may not have found any other way. And so it's good to, either make a copy of something like that or write that information down and then, double check it with other information to make sure it all adds up. And on the right-hand side is another from a Bible, photocopy from a Bible, and it is death information of a family from a family Bible. And I did want to point out, like, because I noticed when I was putting this together that some of these types of documents or records, they kind of can cross over, because some things might be death information or death records, but they came from a Bible. So, you'll notice a lot of these types of documents and records can kind of crisscross into each other's kind of area and things like that. So, but I did want to point that out. There's also cemetery records. Cemetery records, you may learn the birth date of an ancestor. Hopefully, it should provide you with the date of their death, so that should hopefully help you. You could learn their age at the time of death, especially if you look at, barring they actually, hopefully they put, the birth had the birth information included, and also the death information, and you can kind of use some math and figure out what their age was, roughly anyways. And, you may also find out who their ancestors' parents or family were. I know I've seen some cemetery records where they will include like a little anecdote, little piece of information that'll say, Sally Smith was daughter of George Smith, and such and such. So sometimes you may learn some familial connections and things like that, and then you can take that information and look for, a birth record or some other documentation that may connect, certain family members together. And basically, this can also help you pinpoint the location of your ancestor and their family at a specific time. If they're buried in, like Perry County in a particular cemetery, then you might want to, especially towards the end of their life, they may have been living in Perry County since they were buried there. So then you can kind of look around at Perry County records to see if there's anything, before they died that they're recorded in. So, that can kind of help you pinpoint, locations and if they migrated at any point as well. And then here's an example of a cemetery record that you may find in a surname file. Like this one's particularly relating to the Hearst family. And, a lot of these, they'll usually tell you like that they're like a mile off of a certain road and, what their location is. And then they'll usually give you like a listing of what the deceased's name was. And, sometimes they'll give an age, or they'll give like a birth and death date. And like I said, sometimes like there was Green v. Abrams, and he's listed, and it says that he was the son of Stephen and Susan. So sometimes you may find those little pieces of information, and then you can take that information and corroborate it and double check, with other records to make sure it adds up and makes sense. Because, sometimes things might have got recorded wrong in certain places, or, things may have just accidentally got recorded wrong, or, somebody didn't have all the information. So you just want to double check and make sure things connect and make sense. And there is also military records. Military records could help, you may learn the age of your ancestor. You may learn their birthplace, or even just where they were living at that particular time. You may learn the name of their parents or other relatives, whether that's a spouse or a sibling. You could potentially learn the date of their birth, and also, just in general, like the military information that, who they served with, who they served under, what part of, did they serve in a particular war, things like that could kind of help fill out their story, especially if you're trying to put together a narrative, because, then just have just pieces of paper and statistics. You want to, tell a story about your ancestor's life and, what they did and who they met and who they knew and that kind of thing. So, that could help kind of enrich that story as well. And that's another thing I like to always push as well, is to, find things that kind of, make your ancestor, feel like a living, breathing person, and not just like a history, mention or something like that. Okay, and here's a couple of examples of military records you may find. On the left-hand side is a pension, military pension, from the U.S. Interior Bureau of Pensions, and it's a photocopy of a document that honestly it looks like it's seen some rough days because unfortunately some of these documents sometimes they get into bad shape. So that's another important piece of information is to try to save and preserve anything that you can find because you never know if how well things will hold up over time, unfortunately. But yeah, and so you can kind of see that this particular figure, Henry Hurst, he was a Revolutionary soldier, and it lists his children, and so you might sometimes learn other information of what children he had, where he settled at, your ancestor and things like that. So looking through these, you may learn things that you didn't think you would learn by finding these particular documents. And in the right-hand side is it is a claim that another pension, I believe, that is in Mason County, and so it basically is kind of the same thing. You may learn of who your ancestor, especially if they were a veteran or a soldier, who they served with, who knew them, and things like that. And it looks like it was his wife that was putting forward this pension. So, it's just, you can always learn new things and find interesting new things. So it's always useful and good to find that kind of thing. We also do sometimes, you may find in a surname file family histories or biography sketches. These can have a lot of background information. They can help show you where family may have come from, their line of descendants, even where they may have migrated to or from. They may also provide information that can point you towards other records. I know a lot of times when I look at them, they may tell you who they married and, if they moved from Virginia or from, across the, the seas and, migrated from another country to the United States, and then they settled in Kentucky or, they passed through Kentucky and, they may have had, certain number of children, and then those children had children. And, a lot of times you'll find that kind of information in these documents. And so once again, here are a couple of examples. The right or left hand side is, I believe, the Howard family history. And it just kind of gives a breakdown of, different important information as far as the Howard family. You might learn some new names or learn about some other dates and things like that. And then on the right-hand side is the Warnock family of Greenup County. And basically, it just kind of, it provides the list of names and who their descendants were. And, so basically you can just kind of, take that information, write down some names, record the names and dates and locations, and then you can go look for records in that particular county or location and see if you can find those people in, tax records or census records or, other documents, from that time to see if you can, everything will match up basically. And then there are deeds or other land records, but typically I usually see more deeds than anything else. So so it could be deeds or court documents or records, because I have seen in court documents I have seen land disputes or records relating to deeds that have been in that. And so, you could learn where an ancestor was resided, because a lot of deeds I have seen will also include, they'll say John Smith of Woodford County, in the particular document. So, it might help you pinpoint a county that your ancestor was living in. It may also help you kind of follow their migration pattern too, because if you notice that they are selling a bunch of land at a certain time, they could be selling their land so that they can move and migrate to another county or another location. So it's always good to double check on that. And you also may find other relatives of ancestor. You may see that a father and a son are the two that are, that the deed is between. And so, I have had people just when they're asking me to do research for them, they'll ask for deeds, to make a connection between a father and a son. So you can potentially find, relatives of your ancestor through a deed if they were doing a deal with each other, a sale with each other. You also may learn your ancestors' acreage, how well off were they, and things like that. And like I already mentioned, you can maybe see their migration pattern, especially if you look at those records along with maps or atlases, and you can kind of follow them around and kind of keep up with them and things like that. And here's an example of a deed, and I like this example, so I wanted to showcase this one from a surname file. Because it's actually the same deed record from one of the Turner family surname files. And basically, the left-hand side is a photocopy of the original, and then on the right-hand side is actually a transcribed copy that somebody typed up. So it's kind of nice to kind of look at them and use them in tandem with each other because you may have a hard time reading the original document, and then you can double check to see what certain words or names were and things like that. So it's kind of good to use them hand in hand and things like that. But unfortunately, sometimes you don't get that lucky as far as what you might find in a surname file. So sometimes you may just find the original document, or you may find a transcribed copy from a publication. So. But anyways, that's an example I just wanted to show off real quick. Okay, and then there are probate records, and typically those are usually wills, which those can be very, very useful because they can help you potentially find parents or siblings or children of your ancestor. Sometimes you may find an inventory, or you may find a guardianship document, especially if your ancestor was, still a child when their parents died, or there was some kind of, reason where they couldn't be kept by, with their own parents. And so then, they basically got put into a guardianship from, somebody else. And so I know that's kind of a bad explanation, but basically that's kind of the gist. If it was, somebody was too young they weren't an adult, basically, there's a document that maybe they got, adopted by another adult. But anyways, and so here are a couple of examples of probate records. The left-hand side is an inventory of a property of the estate. And so it just kind of lists everything that gentleman had owned at the time of death. And then the right-hand side is a photocopy of an original will, and so you can find kind of different things like that. It's kind of hit or miss as far as surname files go, but when you can find especially a will that lists heirs and the children and the spouse and and that kind of thing, it can be really great. And I do want to point out also that sometimes you can look in court records in general, and you may actually find a will or an inventory in there, because I actually have had that happen to me where I couldn't find an inventory for a person, and I looked in the court records for that county, and it was just kind of embedded kind of in the middle of that. So sometimes depending on, I guess, the circumstances, it may be a thing where it's, went to court for some reason, or it got, recorded as a part of the court records. So, so when it comes to probate records, you may also want to sometimes check court records, and, sometimes court records that would potentially be in a surname file, could potentially have, probate, will information potentially. And then there are like correspondences and letters that are, between different individuals you may find sometimes as well. Uh, and this could be anything between communication between KHS and family researchers. I do see that a lot. That is quite frequent, where an individual will, type up or write out a letter to us and be asking a particular question about that family, and then we stick it in the surname file. Especially if we've found items or found documents, we include the found documents with those responses usually. There also could be letters between family members as well, and a lot of times if you can find, like, especially letters between family members, that can, help you see how your ancestor may have lived, may also help you learn more about the world and the community that your ancestor lived in. And it could just help you learn more about your ancestor and their family in general, and point you in new directions. You may learn about a certain family member that you didn't know about, that your ancestor wrote about in a letter, and then you can try to look for that name in other records then. And also, yeah, basically it can just be a great resource. I know there are also letters and correspondences in our digital collection too. And like, you may learn like what the weather was that particular day back in, 1850. So, sometimes it's just really interesting if you're able to find documents like this in a surname file, because then you can kind of learn more about what was going on in the world and learn more about your ancestor, and, kind of help flesh out their story and their life, as you may. And here's an example of a letter that was between brothers. And so, yeah, it just kind of, goes through, things, and you just kind of get an insight into, what they were doing at that time, and, how their lives were and things like that. So it's just always great to find things like that. It can be very, very useful. Then there's also family trees and family sheets. They're kind of like family histories in a way. You may learn vital information about your ancestor, such as a birth date or a death date. You might learn the ancestor's age at the time of death, learn the names of your ancestor's relatives, and things like that. It could help you, figure out where they were at any given time or place. You might learn, oh, they were born in, a certain county or a certain state, and then you can kind of get a timetable that you can, try to see if everything matches up based off of the information from a document like that. And then here's a couple of like pedigree, like charts and trees and things like that you may find. I do want to forewarn that a lot of times, and not all the times, but quite a few times, you may find like a family tree or a chart in a surname file, and unfortunately it won't be fully complete. It may just have like 2 or 3 names. It may have just, missing birth information or missing death information and things like that. And, obviously they'll only go back so far up to a certain point before, cutting off, just because of the, size of the document and things like that. You'd have to do multiple pages and things like that a lot of times. So I just wanted to stress that sometimes, they can be useful as far as getting you starting out points to like then double check original records. But then sometimes you may just see like a couple of names and there's not a lot going on, so it can be kind of hit or miss. But when they're all are filled out and have like really useful information, they can be really useful and good. But yeah, these are 2 examples here. And we're going to talk about census records. You can learn vital information about your ancestor and their family, such as age, the birth state that they were born in. You may learn who your ancestors' parents were or other relatives were. Sometimes you may also learn what your ancestor's occupation was. Was he a farmer? Was he a laborer? Whatnot. A lot of times, depending on the census, especially if it's, because basically 1850 census and onward, you get to see the whole household. Before that, you only saw the head of the household. So it can be a little more difficult finding certain key pieces of information, on the earlier censuses. I mean, it can still be done, but you'd have to kind of know who was there at that time and kind of know who was who, and kind of keep track of numbers and things like that. But it is good, like 1850 and onwards, because you can see like who, your ancestor's spouse or who their children were. You may also see sometimes that the parents were living with the children, especially in their older age. So, you can figure out who's living where and kind of follow a path, depending on, that information. So it can be really, really useful information as far as following your ancestors around. And here's a couple of examples of census records that you may find in a surname file. And the right hand side is more of more of an index, because we do have some books here at KHS that are just like census indexes for like the different decades, and it'll just kind of list everybody by surname alphabetically, and then include like the county information and that kind of good stuff. And then on the left hand side is the more traditional, what you might find if you were like opening up a census book or a document where it'll list the whole family and have like their ages and that kind of stuff. Okay, so how can you use surname files? I mean, they could be great help with getting past brick walls and finding new connections. Basically, creating new paths in your research, because a lot of times you may get stuck and, you may decide to look in a surname file and you may see a name, or you may find information that shows your ancestor may have been in this particular county at this time, and then you may have not thought to look there, or or something, and then you can basically then take that information and be like, oh, okay, well, let me check in that county now instead. Yeah, so a lot of times it just really helps with brick walls. It can also just be a great starting out point. I say this usually at the end of all my Surname Saturday posts. If you're just starting out, it could be a great thing for you to just kind of get a good jumping off point, basically. I know when people come into our library here at KHS, one of the main places that we suggest first is to check the surname files, especially if they're looking for a certain family but they don't really have a particular direction, or they're not really entirely sure what they're looking for exactly. And so it can just kind of give you a path and kind of help point you in the right direction and things like that. Also, it can just create learning experiences, because you may find, like I've mentioned, and like I've hit this point several times now, you may find something new. Even so, you may find things that point you in the wrong direction. You may not find, anything useful at all. And a lot of times people will say that is a failure, but a lot of times in genealogy and family research, that's still a key important thing, is to fail at times, when you're researching, because then you can record that, write that down, remember that, and basically know not to, go down that path again. You'll be like, okay, I'm going to avoid that because I did that the last time and it didn't work out for me. So, sometimes it could just create learning experiences to where you're like, okay, next time I'll know to do this or to not do this. So that can always be very, very useful as far as surname files go. And you also, may find something new that enriches your ancestor's story and life. Like I've mentioned before, you may find a letter that, kind of tells you more about the day that they were living in, or, you may, learn more about their military history, that, what they did then, things like that, that kind of help you understand your ancestor more. And I did want to kind of go over some things to remember. Some of these I've kind of knocked on a few times throughout this stream, but it's always important to corroborate and to double check with original records. I stress this at the end of every Surname Saturday post, and I've stressed this like a million times now. It's just very important because, sometimes I mean, because a lot of the stuff that are in surname files are photocopies or they may be secondhand information. And so you want to make sure you have the original documentation because, that's one of the key cornerstones of doing genealogy and family research is to, cite your sources and to, make sure you have like primary sources and original records and, and things like that, as well as, what you find in surname files. Also, when you are looking at surname files, sometimes like we do have we have surname files that will be the same, basically the same surname, but there will be alternate spellings of that surname. They may use an O or a U or an I, and they change out some of the letters, or the different branches of that family may have changed the spelling over the years, and things like that. So there could be alternately spelled surnames, and sometimes we'll have multiple folders for each of the different spellings, and then sometimes we also do have the information for those alternately spelled surnames combined into a shared folder. And also, like I've also mentioned earlier, not all surname files have the same information. One may have, like I said earlier, 20 pages or 50 pages. One may just have one photocopy. You may find a family history in one surname file, and you may find a birth record in a different one, and then you may find a newspaper article in another one. So it is very important to take note of. So yeah. And so now here towards the end, I did want to provide you my contact information because I know a lot of times people will have questions, and especially when it comes to surname files. And, especially if you're watching this later on after this stream is over. So like I said at the start, my name is Daniel Ware. I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society. You can see my email there. And then also that's my office phone number. And so then if you do have any questions about this or anything else genealogy related, you can always contact me. You can rewind this video or pause on this moment to, really record that information. And so that's pretty much it as far as the slideshow bit goes. I did want to kind of show you like where there's a PDF that we have in our digital collection as far as the surname files that we do have on hand. So I did want to kind of show you where you could go for some of that kind of stuff while I had you here. So basically, if you go to our main website, which is history.ky.gov, that's G-O-V, that'll basically take you to our main website. And then if you can see here, there are these different tabs that are here. If you go to this Explore tab right here and kind of hover on it, this kind of yellow-orangey colored drop box will drop down. And you will see Catalog and Research Tools. And you click on that, and it'll take you to this page here. And if you go down a little bit, you'll see these different options. Because there's also a library catalog that we have, and that'll allow you to see what books and materials we have in the library. But if you're wanting to go to see what kind of surname files that we have on hand and to see our PDF that we have, if you click on the digital collections box here, it'll take you to the digital collections page. And we'll scroll down a little bit. And then there's this digital collections button right here. You click on that. And then you'll see some different types of search options that you can do. But if you go up here to this upper right-hand corner, this search box right here, and if you type in surname files, then this first option right here at the top here that I'm circling around, that is the PDF that you will want to double check just to make sure we even have the a surname file for a family that you're looking for. And that way, if you were planning a trip, you wouldn't, waste a trip if we don't have the surname file or, or whatnot. And then if you look over here to the side here, there are the different, well, come on. I don't know why this is trying to get it to scroll. Oh, hold on. Oh, nope. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, you'll see like they're all alphabetical, and basically you just click on whichever one that you're looking for alphabetically, and you can basically then see what surnames are available on the PDF based on the letter. Like these are all the surnames that start with the letter A. And if you click on this little box right here, that'll expand that so you can see there are like 3 pages of the different files, and it'll basically have a surname, and then beside it it'll say like 1 file or 2 files or 3 files or whatnot. So this can be good to look if you're just curious. I would also suggest potentially contacting either myself, and you should have my contact information. It's at the end of my slide. Or you can contact our reference desk, which is the Martin F. Schmidt Research Library. And basically, the contact information for our reference desk is down here at the bottom here. Here's the email, and then the phone number right here. So you can ask whoever's at the desk, and they should be able to help you with that. And that's also a good example of, because a lot of times, if you're wanting to do a photocopy request, you may not know how many pages are in those surname files. So sometimes it's good to call or contact us, and we can go and do like a page count for you and then let you know. So that's a good way to like keep in contact with us. Let's see. So yeah, so that's basically if you are interested in seeing as far as surname files go. Also, let's see. Also, like if you do want to have a photocopy request submitted, if you go back to where like you'll see the tabs again at the top of the page, and if you go back to the Explore tab again, there's a Library Research Services link. And if you click on that, it'll take you to this page. And if you scroll down a little bit, about a good way down, you'll see there's a photocopy requests. And that's basically typically if there's like cited sources, or like, if there's like a book that we have in our collection and you're wanting certain pages, because due to copyright, we can't necessarily photocopy a whole book or a whole particular document. But it's like surname files. Typically, somebody will do a page count, and they maybe 10 pages in that surname file, and then they send in the request and pay the photocopy request fee that goes along with it. And I'll click on because there's a download form here link right here. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to show you what the form looks like, just so you kind of have an idea if you haven't ever gone down this avenue before. And basically you just kind of fill in the different information, and there's the different costs and processing fee and all that good stuff. So basically, yeah, you just fill that out and email that to us, or mail it in the mail to us, and then we would do the photocopy request and then send you the photocopies. And so basically that's kind of the key as far as that goes. And I do want to say once again that if you have any questions about any of this, the process, the whole photocopy request form, looking for these particular surname files, trying to find, how many pages are in a surname file, you can always contact me. Like I said, my information will be at the end of my presentation, so you should have it, or you can go back and look, or you can contact our reference desk. I did also want to kind of point out also that some upcoming programming that we're going to be doing, starting, the next few months. So I think the March program is already up on our website. So I'm going to go up here to the top to the tabs again. And if you highlight the news and events, you can actually go down to, there's an events link. And if you go there, it'll show you some different events that we have coming up. Like there's the one that we're currently doing right now. If you go down here, you'll see Kentucky Ancestors Facebook Live, Making Sense of Court Records. Yes, that's right. The next second Saturday genealogy program that I will be doing will be Saturday, March 8th, and it will be Making Sense of Court Records, because that can be another useful item, resource that you may need, you may want to find more information on as far as your family research and things like that. So it's always good to do that. But yeah, basically I'll just kind of be talking about like how you can use court records and, how to find them and things like that. And in April, that'll be Saturday, April 12th. I'll be basically just answering your genealogy questions. It's going to be more, I'm hoping people will come forward and ask questions, and, I'll try to kind of have some, frequently asked questions kind of thing where, people that do, it'll be to help people who get stuck or don't know where to start, or, talk about different experiences and, in genealogy and family research. So, that'll hopefully help people. And in May, I will be doing, that'll be Saturday, May 10th. That'll be Adventures in Newspapers. And that's going to be more me talking about how you can use newspapers to do your genealogy and family research. And, a lot of times, like I know myself, like I'll look at newspaper articles to try to find obituaries, or even to find other things like marriage announcements even, or, other things that, a person may have been included in, and, to kind of help you figure out how to use newspapers to the best of your ability. And also later on in the year, we will have some guest speakers. I know one will be one of my coworkers who is involved with the America 250 KY program that we have here at KHS, and she will be talking about how Kentucky and the America 250 initiative, I guess in general, how they can kind of go hand in hand in the celebration of America's 250th anniversary that will be coming up here soon. And if you do have more information about the America 250 KY initiative and program, we do have a section on our website. You can actually go there by going to our main website, and there's an America 250 tab, and you can honestly just click on that and it'll basically take you to this page, and basically you can learn more about what is going on and the different branches and things that are happening under this umbrella. So there's that. And let's see, trying to think what else. Yes, also another guest speaker that I do know we will be having. He is an expert with military history, so he'll be talking about Kentucky military history, and so hopefully I'll be able to tell you more about that and some of the other programs as we get farther along in the year. But I just want to kind of give you a heads up of a kind of the roadmap of how things will be going this year. And I think that will about do it. You're more than welcome to, after this stream is ended, to still to comment in the comment section, or to contact me, and I can answer any questions that you may have, after this. And I look forward to seeing you all in March, where, like I said, I'll be talking about court records. Thank you all for joining me today, and you all have a great day. Bye-bye.